Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Jeff Richard and we talked about mythology in Glorantha. Specifically, we talked about how mythology was critical to the development of the setting and how it's a central aspect of life in the world of Glorantha. I'm going to jump across to that interview in just a moment, but first, remember to subscribe to the Chaosium YouTube channel. It helps us out and it lets us make more content like this. Thanks.
Yeah, mythology is really, it is what is true in the world. Mythology, even though myths can contradict each other, all myths are a true experience. They're an expression of something that is true in the world and is something in the God time, the God's world. And these are the things that make the world what it is. So mythology isn't an attempt to explain something that already exists. It's the experience story of why something exists in the first place. So it's kind of in Glorantha and in RuneQuest, it's kind of the opposite of how we usually think about mythology. It's the true thing. It's the secret to understanding the way the world really works. And for in many games, particularly RuneQuest games that deal with hero questing and some of the big magical activity in the game, mythology is your map to understanding the other world and having your character be able to do cool things in the other world and gain great powers.
How important was mythology in the creation process of Glorantha?
Well, Greg Stafford, who created Glorantha, or as he would put it, discovered Glorantha. He always denied creating it. Greg was a practicing shaman and very much a student of mythology. It's through Greg that I really got into Jung and Campbell and learned about the eternal recurrence and all sorts of issues of mythological study. And so Glorantha is an opportunity for us to create and experience our own mythology that we can make our own, that we can change, and that we can experience at least through the medium of role-playing games.
Do you think that mythology in Glorantha is essentially the same as the mythology in the ancient world? So the beliefs that were held by ancient peoples in our world is mirrored by the way that mythology is viewed by the denizens of Glorantha?
The way I view it is that the mythology of Glorantha is the way it is similar to the way the ancients thought the world worked. So it's not the same as ancient mythology. You know, we don't have Zeus, we don't have Frey, we don't have, Lu Samaldana proving that he's the master of every skill and so on. But what we have is the approach towards mythology is very, very much the way that people in the ancient world approached mythology as the sacred truths that really explain how the world functions.
So what does it mean to say when you're playing a game of RuneQuest, you are creating, heroes and stories of myth?
Well, when you're playing a role-playing game, you are playing this character, and you're playing a character that wields magic and is dealing with things like trolls and elves and sun worshippers or storm worshippers. And you're creating stories through your adventures. And these stories are a form of experienced myth because your characters are all, most of your characters are trying to wield or are wielding the power of the gods, and they're trying to do it in a way that is consistent with what their cult incentivizes them to do. If so if I'm playing an Orlanth worshiper and I want to be able to smack people with my thunderbolt or lightning or ward off blows with my mighty shield spell, I'm trying to act in these adventures like I think Orlanth would, based on my understanding of Orlanth as a player, which to a large extent is created by me. I mean, there's some stories and there's some descriptions of these cults, but a lot of that is going to be what I, as a player, or my GM, what she brings to the table on this. And by doing this, we create this epic, exciting story, which also has a mythological element to it, and which is something I find terribly exciting.
I want to ask you two questions, one from the perspective of somebody who is very familiar with mythology and narratology, and one from the perspective of somebody who is maybe not as familiar. First of all, from the perspective of somebody who doesn't really follow the kind of structure of myth and its role in story, they might hear about this and think, well, does that mean that RuneQuest will miss out on some aspects for me because I don't necessarily have that attachment to the structure of stories? Do you have to be a student of mythology?
Not at all. Absolutely not. In fact, I actually tend to think that the people that are newest to this get the most energy out of it, that they have the most fun with it, because we're all familiar, even if we don't analyze it or try to logically structure it, we're all familiar with myths. If we think about what a dungeon crawl is, that's a version of the tale of the journey into the underworld. Right? We go down into the darkness. We go into the this mysterious realm filled with danger and monsters, and we try to get whatever it is, the treasure we're going after. I mean, God, very least, let's hope there's some reason we've gone down into this, and we try to bring it back to the world. There you are. That's the classic hero's journey in a nutshell. Being able to talk about it or apply labels to it doesn't really make me enjoy the adventure of a dungeon, going down into a dungeon or a cave, any more than if I know nothing about it. It's like enjoying a good film that has some cool themes to it. I don't have to sit around and study film criticism in order to enjoy a cool and exciting film. And so if you're new to mythology, dive in with with both feet, and just enjoy it.
And from the perspective of somebody who is maybe a little more familiar, are there resources or angles that you would suggest approaching the game from that might enhance your enjoyment if you were somebody who, loves, Campbell or Jungian archetypes and wants to involve them in RuneQuest?
I regularly refer back to the hero of 1,000 faces. I regularly refer back to Campbell. I know that academically, there's a lot of criticism of Campbell, and certainly at a certain point, he made his stories entirely too neat. But nonetheless, as a book about how we put together archetypes, I go back to it all the time. I go back to my Jung as well. But I've always liked Carl Jung. I was a gigantic fan of the band The Police, and so I actually got into Carl Jung from the Synchronicity album. So and these things are good to know about. They're great to bring in. Knowing the Tibetan Book of the Dead, hey, that's a great thing to bring in. Or having read Bullfinch's Mythology or Neil Gaiman's Sandman. All of these are equally good sources of mythological understanding.
We might not include this next question in the interview, but I want to throw it out to you because I'm just particularly interested in it. When I was studying narratology at university, I went on a trip to India and we talked about the rasa, which is kind of a narratological structure from
Yep.
India. Do you think that the RuneQuest captures a lot of the traditional storytelling formats and heroic journeys from non-Western cultures and from around the world, as well as those kind of centralized in Western canon?
Oh, I think actually it does a better job of capturing the contradiction in non-Western stories. I mean, one of the problems that we have about understanding Western mythology is we fossilized it a very, very long time ago. Our great sources of Western mythology, we don't, outside of Christianity, we don't experience mythology anymore. We read about it. I mean, there are obviously, there are people who practice shamanism or various other approaches to it, but we, in general, our mainstream culture, we don't actively participate in mythology. We get it. It's mainly in books. It's in books where people still go up to, either in books where people still go to worship ceremonies and still go through the practice of worship, or it's books that are about long dead mythologies that nobody has actively participated in for over a millennia. So we're for us, by and large, we crave mythology, but we live in a largely secular society all of this has been cleansed out. You go outside of the West, you go to South Asia, you go to Central America or the American Southwest or elsewhere in the world, and there's still living mythology. And I think tabletop role-playing games, weirdly, is got a lot more in common with that creation, that storytelling tradition of where every storyteller tells a different version of the sacred story, and that's fine. And that's something inherent in tabletop. I mean, how many people have gone through the same scenario?
I was really interested in what you said there about the way that we are maybe desperate for mythology, but we are not embracing it in some places. And I think that one of the things that epitomizes that for me is that we tend to relabel mythology. We call it things like aesthetic theory, and we call it things like narratology even, and kind of deny its roots in a mythological space.
Oh yeah, but that's very much very much the modern Western way of dealing with this. And if we abstract it away to the point where we can't experience it because we've created barriers of words and labels that eliminate what actually the core event is. And one of the reasons I love role-playing games as a way of exploring mythology is we experience it. We experience the story. It's not direct. We're doing it through the mask of our player character, but we're still experiencing it, and we're experiencing these stories usually in a way where, hey, we're just totally open to it. We're willing to play around with this. We don't have the barriers that we normally put up when we try to listen to a story or understand things. And so I kind of wish that role playing was something that was taken way more seriously as an art form, because it's one of the few ones I can imagine where we get to do that.